Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat. If you don't, I don't care. I'll pull down your underwear. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. I'm Mahi and I'm here with my co-hosts, Sheikh Amr Saeed and Sim. And today we welcome back a former guest of ours, Abdul Malik Ryan, as we're going to talk about a lot of issues. We got a little roundtable discussion with Abdul Malik today, talking about Halloween, and then always popular online Muslim drama regarding a various amount of issues. So Abdul Malik, first of all, well, welcome back. It's always good to have you on the show. Alhamdulillah, your last show received a lot of rave reviews from a lot of our listeners. Really enjoyed it, and we enjoyed it as well. Something that's definitely been a repeat listen for myself personally through the heavy intellectual content on there.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum. It's good to be here.
I'm with you on this one. I really didn't think he was going to go through with that trick-or-treat thing. He actually did it.
No, it's all good, though. You know, Abdul Malik, so are you going to be a leprechaun for Halloween? I know you're, like, Irish and everything, right?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, that's all he says. Alhamdulillah.
Man, like, where can I get a good leprechaun outfit?
I don't know.
You wouldn't know?
Ireland, okay? Or Boston.
I mean, so Halloween's this weekend, right? You know, when it's every year, everyone's talking about like, hey man, I gotta cut my lights out so nobody comes trick or treating and stuff, right?
Put the sign up
or whatever. We don't do that. But do we really not do that? Like, what's like a lot of Muslims participate in Halloween, and some people say, well, it's Haramoween or it's Halaloween or like what do we? I've never really been a big part about Halloween, and I've boycotted people in the past for celebrating Halloween. Because it's an Aqidah issue, in my opinion. You know, the borderline kufr of shirk, you know.
So before we get into this, can I just make a little disclaimer?
Sure.
Anytime we have a disagreement, we have to make sure, if we're sincere about getting to the conclusion if something's halal or haram, we have to make sure that we strip all of the emotion out of a subject and talk about the subject for what it is. Because you mentioned something about boycotting, and I know you're saying that as a joke, but many people...
I was serious, but like, see... Keep going.
All right, then we're going to have a really good roundtable today. One thing we have to understand is that people are always going to have their opinions, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. But if somebody is celebrating a festival, which now... And even though I may disagree with it, I have to be very fair that if somebody's celebrating this, it's not enough for me to cut ties with somebody that says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Rasulullah, because they themselves, they may be religious people, but they see it as something that's just a festival for their kids to get out. They don't want their kids to be left out, whatever the case may be. We could talk about all the Islamic rulings behind it. But one thing we have to understand is this is not something that we sever ties with Muslims with. And we should, if we are having a conversation, leave your emotions at the doorstep, leave your ego at the doorstep, whatever you were raised with. That's totally cool. We respect that. But look at the subject for what it is. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I mean, you know, as a layman, I know you're the scholar on the show and everything, and I don't know anything, but I think I'm right, even though you probably know more, but still, you know what I'm saying?
I'm right anyway.
Abdul Malik, what do you think about you grew up celebrating Halloween, you know, as you were a later convert to Islam. What's Halloween to you?
Yeah, so, you know, and I was actually just thinking about this recently because someone else was asking me about, like, growing up celebrating Halloween, and I really hadn't thought of it for a long time, but I was thinking about how much my mother, you know, who returned to Allah, but how much she used to really get into it, and not in a weird way, because to her, Halloween, and this I think is true for a lot of people, Halloween was not about anything religious or satanic or anything. It was nothing but a time for kids to dress up and for people in the neighborhood to come around, and you could give out candy. And she would get into it just of that sense of like seeing all the kids in the neighborhood. What are they dressed as this year? You know, greeting them, giving them candy. And really one of the few things left in our society is it gets more and more individualistic, more and more we're like social media centered, but we're not focused on our communities, our neighbors. We may not even know our neighbors. So that was still something that was like a community aspect where everyone would do it and everyone would come on and get to know each other. So thinking of that made me realize like how some people, even Muslims nowadays, they'll say things like this, like say like when we do, which is what my family does, you know, turn the lights off and put a sign saying, sorry, we don't celebrate Halloween. And you feel, you know, you feel, or I'm one of those people that prefers to just like be out of the house that day, like don't come home. But I know my family has to be home or whatever. And
then
do
you
that.
get the exit on your windows.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I think but like you said, I also come from the perspective where religiously since I was Muslim, I never really thought, at first I just didn't think of it. I'm like, I'm Muslim now, we don't celebrate Halloween. And especially the teachers I was around and stuff, they were pretty clear on those things at that time. They were pretty clear people, like Eid is our only holidays, we don't celebrate anything else, even birthdays we didn't celebrate. So for us to go around starting to celebrate Halloween, also, as I talked about on our last podcast, I had like a kind of a cultural thing where I like the fact of Muslims being like separate culturally, even though we were still united with like our neighbors but we had an idea that we're different than other people, and that's cool. That's fine. So, I always kind of embrace those aspects of not celebrating Halloween, but now I see that where other people are coming from, and I at least cannot get upset with them. I think our tendency, is to get very emotional about these issues. And, I'm not against emotion. Like, I'm a romantic Salafi. So we're all about emotion. We're not about logic and stuff. So, but the question is to look back and think, why are we getting so emotional about this? First of all, is it for the sake of Allah or is it for the sake of our nafs? 99% of the time it's just for the sake of your nafs. It's not really for the sake of Allah.
That's the golden question.
So you should just forget it right then. Once you realize that it's for your nafs, even if it's for a true cause, you should just forget it and leave it. And that's 99% of the time. Then 1% of the time you may sincerely be worried for the sake of Allah, but then even then you have to think, like, how can I put myself in the other person's perspective? How can I see where they're coming from and not only see it from my perspective? Because even if I think they're completely wrong, if I want to influence them, I have to see it from their perspective. Yeah. So I have to think, like, maybe we can think of other ways we can get more involved in our community. Does it have to just be this day? Or maybe I can make them think, like, you don't think there's any harm, but maybe here are some harms from our Aqidah perspective that you don't really think about. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of discussions we can have, but they all have to start, as you're saying, from really being first self-introspective of ourselves, of why we're taking the opinion we're taking. Because the natural tendency is to, and we'll see this on maybe some other issues we talk about if we get into social media drama and whatever, is everything becomes what we call in the American political scene like culture war issues.
Yeah.
Like, are you liberal? Are you conservative? Are you red? Are you blue? Are you this or you're that? So every issue becomes so emotional because it's about your team versus the other team. Yeah. It's about your, which side are you on? And you can issues that don't even seem to directly relate to that, but every issue you're just like, and then you start getting mad and bringing other issues that aren't even related to Halloween.
You're right.
It's like, that's probably why you vote, and that's probably why you do this, and probably why you don't wear hijab either, and stuff like that, because you just want to fit in. Everything becomes in our mind, all these issues start racing together, and we're just trying to see what team are you on versus what team am I on. And that's what we need to get away from. We need to, try to think of ourselves first and foremost as Muslims.
So me and my wife, we were always on opposite ends of Halloween. She was always against it and I was for it. I'm like, this is a kid's holiday. And what we've done as adults is we've completely politicized it and made it a way to talk about how we look at anything that is controversial, or maybe utilize the tools of fiqh, I guess, and how to kind of get people to evaluate whatever controversial issues are going on and try to evaluate it with the Quran and Sunnah in mind. So that being said, my nafs for this issue was, because I'm a big 35-year-old man, I don't have any inclinations to dress up in a costume. I kind of always let my wife decide. But what we ended up doing was I think we ended up doing a costume party a month or so from now for the kids in the house and some of their cousins. They kind of get together and they do they all dress up as ninjas and fight each other. So I think that's a
helps
balance.
With the sanity of the kids. Too.
Yeah,
it helps with, because everyone's having fun. Why can't we? Why is Islam always stopping us from having fun? That part I understand.
Yeah, but with Halloween, I think a lot of the times the discussion always kind of ends up being, well, what are the origins of Halloween? And some people say it's like a pagan holiday and whatnot. And and that's usually the crux of the argument that I've always heard, at least in those chain mails that go around in everyone's inboxes. This is why Halloween's haram, and then you see 10 reasons why, and Samhain and all these other pagan gods that you end up hearing about. I had no idea these people existed until you told me, but now I'm wondering.
No, and just to touch upon the subject very quickly, just so we can understand both sides. I personally don't celebrate Halloween. I don't think Muslims should, but that's my personal opinion. But we have to be fair. Again, I have to leave my emotion at the door and understand where all this started from. Us as Muslims understand as a part of our deen that we have celebrations which are Eid because they're religious celebrations, right? And any other religion that has their religious celebration, that's what Muslims are prevented from doing, right? Is for instance, Muslims can't celebrate Christmas, even though Isa alayhi salam is mentioned in the Quran more than Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's still a celebration of another religion, which will basically put you in that same category of celebrations, right? With Christians. So anything that has to do with religions. Now, the tricky thing about Halloween is, and
that nobody knows the origins.
Yeah, no, not about the origins, but it's not actually about a pagan holiday. They're actually commemorating. That's why it becomes a gray area. Is that they're commemorating the spirits of the dead and
jinns,
warding off evil and demons, right?
Yeah.
Now, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Quran and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed us in the Sunnah how to ward off evil demons and shayateen and all that stuff. But a portion of the celebration is not about commemorating paganism. They were commemorating the dead.
Yeah.
And they would commemorate the dead to ward off the evil at some times.
Right.
And even the history, like we were mentioning before the podcast, is not 100% known. Was it that pagans were having the celebration as to spread our paganism? If that was the case, it'd be clear-cut haram. But that historically is not the case. Historically, it's about commemorating the dead and all that. And that's why people dressed out to ward off evil. They thought if they dressed in a certain way, they were going to ward off evil. Right?
Right.
So that's where that fine line is. And that's where which is why I still believe that's not allowed. I wouldn't, really allow my kids to do it, but I would have an exchange for them, instead of going and celebrating something on Halloween, let's go do something else. You know what I'm saying? But that's where we have to understand. So if a Muslim, he's actually not commemorating paganism if he's celebrating Halloween. We have to understand that.
Yeah.
They're following a practice that the paganism may have believed or the origins may have come from, but even now, which many scholars talk about, is that it's not even that anymore. All atheists celebrate Halloween. All Christians celebrate Halloween. No one even considers paganism. Even though I don't agree with that argument, but we have to understand that that's there.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
I've heard some shayukh say in like a few decades, Christmas may be like that with the rise of secularism and atheism. It's just a commercial holiday. All people know is a tree. I remember as a kid growing up, the kids in my class are like, they don't know anything about Christmas or Jesus Christ. It was like, I'm getting some Jordans, some video games.
That's true, but the church is still celebrated and everybody still understands that it's a Christian holiday. The majority of the people are not Christians possibly that even celebrate it, but it's still existent and people still utilize that day for their worship of what they believe is God.
But I'm saying like in a couple of decades, let's say there's the church element is completely phased out. America's like 90% atheist or something and 10% Muslim. Right.
Yeah.
In like a couple years once we like take over.
What?
Or something.
Hypothetical. It's okay. He's coming back to his Hanafi roots. He's being hypothetical.
You know what I mean?
Go ahead.
Like at that point, all it is just trees. Like let's say it becomes just trees and gifts and presents and songs.
But the origin itself in Islam is always something that you have to look at.
But the origin is debatable in this. That's my only thing. That what a lot of it is with regards to the origins of Halloween is that it's a lot of guesswork and
there's nothing clear cut where you can say this is a part of your aqidah.
No, there's a lot of historical guesswork. They don't know for a fact. They think it's there's no firm literature saying even October 31st was the day that they commemorated Halloween. So
I think that the fascinating thing is with all these issues, the deeper you explore it, the more you'll find there is even difference of opinion about the facts. So a lot of times we talk about difference of opinion about like the scholarly ruling.
Right.
But sometimes, but that's based on knowing the facts. But then sometimes there's difference of opinion about the facts. And sometimes they're just because we don't know. And sometimes because people choose to see the same information different ways based on their own ideology and where they're coming from. I think you'll see, like you're mentioning with Christmas, even Christmas, in a lot of ways, at least the time they do it and stuff starts from pagan origins. Then the Christians kind of proclaim it.
You're right.
Now the consumerists and the materialists take hold of it. So things over time, we have different origins and they transform. And then we also have each individual person their own intention, which may or may not be different. And we know people's intention, people's intention, depending on the issue, someone's intention may not make something that's haram halal.
Yeah.
We know you can't just because you have a good intention make something haram halal. But people's intentions definitely affect something being shirk or something being kufr or all these things. It depends why they're doing it. And that's where we find our scholars always examining. And that's, again, something that gets lost in the emotion sometimes.
Yeah.
Is that people start saying, oh, Halloween, shaitan, kufr, shirk.
Yeah.
And then like the stereotypical, all of a sudden I saw someone posting really about this, and they just went right 0 to 100 right away.
Yep.
And this wasn't actually about Halloween, but about a different holiday. And they just went from 0 to 100 of like, this is shirk, like you have to stop it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you didn't even ask them like, what were they doing? What do they mean when they're celebrating? Someone like me in the campus environment, if someone goes to like, say they have a Diwali party or whatever, if someone goes to that party, is that automatically like celebrating Diwali? What does that mean? Maybe I'm just observing what they're doing. Maybe I'm just going to talk to them or show support. We don't necessarily assume everyone who comes to our Eid party is celebrating Eid. They're not religiously.
You're right. And let's just say there's some individuals, I knew some youth when I was growing up, they used to go to a Diwali party just to hook up with girls. Now, are they actually committing shirk? No, they're not committing shirk.
Just committing a haram.
They're like, and just how they would say it. I mean, there's good ways of saying adab, even about, a religion that's polytheism. Yeah. But they're like, man, we don't care about these Hindus, man. We just want to celebrate. We just want to hook up with girls. And that's what their mindset was. Now, are you going to call this person a mushrik because he went to Diwali, which is a religious holiday? You're not going to say that to him.
Yeah.
Right?
So what are your thoughts as a fellow sneakerhead? They got these Halloween edition shoes.
Yeah.
I got the KD5 Christmas joints.
Yeah.
So is that haram to wear now?
I personally, I don't know. I'm not going to answer you right away. But I always, with me, that's why I just love the retros, the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up to 13. After that, I don't care about holidays, brother.
Yeah.
I'm an OG.
Christmas shoes.
That's y'all new school stuff.
The Christmas. No, but sometimes they'll have the Jordan, the 1, 2, 3s in the Christmas edition.
I know.
Like Air Jordan 1 Christmas.
Believe it
Air
or not,
Jordan
when I saw
Halloween.
some of them, I'd be thinking in my mind, I was like, dude, should I actually get these? Because it's actually Christmas and it's known to be Christmas, so I wouldn't end up getting it. But I don't have a solid answer.
Before we segue off Halloween, I want to ask.
Well, before one more thing.
Okay.
Just in case some of our shrewder listeners may have picked up on it, but for those who are upset about us talking about Halloween, it's because we wanted to have a discussion on something that is relatively benign.
Yeah, and something that's relative, because everyone's talking about it. Why not? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to cause separation over if one of your brothers wants to have one of his kids dress up, even though he's not going to celebrate Halloween. He may be a devout Muslim. He just wants his kids to have fun. And we have to look at it and leave our emotion at the door again. I know we keep saying this, but it's something that is, we have to be very mature about these things.
Before we leave the Halloween discussion, though, do anyone have any jinn stories to share?
Oh, we could talk about exorcism.
Exorcism! Hey, remember the time we went to an exorcism together?
Yes.
Tell us about that time.
There's a brother in our community who kind of I started shadowing him in different exorcisms that he would do, and then me and him ended up at the same exorcism. Me and Sim.
So I'm going to share one story. Okay, I'm not going to reveal the patient's name.
Yes.
Or any inkling about it to protect privacy.
And just remind you, the exorcism in Islam is only done through the Quran, nothing else.
So me and Sheikh Amr are there sitting. Actually, Sheikh Amr came later.
Yeah, I walked in later.
The patient is getting the exorcism done, and they're kind of in like almost like a hypnotic state. Okay, and so there's another person in the room. Not going to reveal their name, but they pull out their camcorder on their phone. So they're pulling out their phone, and they start recording the exorcism, and they're actually sitting behind the patient itself. So the patient can't see the person recording them. And all of a sudden, what happens is, the patient says, "We're being recorded." And the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And curiously though, the patient goes, "Look in the bookshelves." The bookshelves are actually in front of the patient, like 10, 15 feet. But the recording is actually happening behind the patient.
And the patient doesn't know about the recording.
And the patient has no idea about the recording. But the moment the patient says that person freaks out, shoves the phone back in the pocket, and just gives me this look like, "Let's get out of here right now." And but that's just one scene I kind of wanted to share with the.
Yeah, and he talked about something as far as a hypnotic state, which seems to be, and that comes through reading certain verses through the Quran. If somebody's affected with black magic or jinns, and depending on what verse that you read, and you repeat it over, you read it in a repetitive manner sometimes, or you would skip from different verses, referring to Harut and Marut, as Allah mentions in the Quran, it'll make the jinn manifest, itself. So the individual who's the exorcist themselves, they can actually communicate with the jinn to ask, why are you here? Why are you bothering this believer? Don't you know that? And even when you do exorcism of a home, people claim that, people will say that I hear all these noise in my house every time I go to sleep, or I'm reading Quran, or I call the adhan in my house. I hear all this havoc inside of my house. The reason why that happens, and it's not allowed to happen from the side of the jinns, because Sulaiman alayhi salam, before the ending of his prophethood, he made a contract, which is in the Quran, that the jinns will not dwell in the homes of the people. So if you're doing exorcism of a home, you have to remind them, I'm reminding you of the treaty that you have between Sulaiman alayhi salam, that you're not going to come and interfere with the dwelling of the believers or the human beings, right? So it's actually very interactive and it's real. It actually happens. Yeah. So instead of warding off evil in any other ways, we have to utilize the Quran because Allah instructs us to do so.
I didn't believe in any of this stuff until I was, how Sheikh Hammer shadows someone who's an expert. I kind of shadow Sheikh Hammer. So, I get to kind of see some of the juicy stuff every once in a while, but, yeah, I never believed in any of this stuff. I thought, it's probably most likely, and then sometimes it is psychological, psychiatric issues. And as much as, I kind of wanted to be a skeptic regarding it, and I came out from that day, I'm like,
and you just gave them an awesome exchange of what to do. Sorry to cut you off. Yeah. But instead of celebrating Halloween, something so superficial, why don't you learn how to do exorcism through the Quran? That'll be a lot more fun.
That's too scary for people.
Hey, I'm giving you guys an exchange. We can complain, but people will be like, why wouldn't you give us a solution? There's a solution. Learn to read the Quran in a way that you can ward off evil.
I actually have a really personal question for all you guys. Sheikh Amr, if you celebrated Halloween, who would you dress up as?
Oh my God, Maheen, why are you asking me this question?
If you did,
I would dress up as a Buckeye. How's that?
Good choice.
I have no idea.
Abdul Malik?
I don't know, man. I already have the Kaepernick jersey, so maybe I'll just go.
It would probably be something like steampunk related.
Okay.
I like that steampunk culture.
What's steampunk? What is that?
Steampunk is like, what's the setting? Like 1800s? Like setting, but it's like futuristic at the same time. It's like it's like that one Will Smith movie, Wild Wild West.
Okay,
it's got like this.
As soon as you said that, I just thought of steaming vegetables or
it's like steam engines and but then at the same time, there's a lot of futuristic technology. It's kind of like a hybrid of Wild West and futuristic technology. So I don't know.
Yeah, I would dress up as Pamela Geller, the Islamophobe. Personally, I think that'd be the hit.
So you would dress up as a horse?
Yeah, I'd scream like one too.
Anyways, guys, this is going weird.
All right,
so
anyway.
So what else, brothers?
So all right, so a lot of things happening on the online sphere. That's where Muslims are out in full force, not doing any real work in the community, but always online. So let's start with a couple issues. We have one of our umbrella organizations here in Chicago, CIOGC, had their dinner last night. One of the awards was to our sister Rabia Chaudhry, done a lot of good work, especially with the Adnan Syed case. And then she released a book, which I've got to check out, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. And those of y'all who don't know about Adnan Syed, he has a podcast. She did the podcast, Serial Podcast. I think had 120 million downloads or something. Yeah, something ridiculous. Like most downloaded podcast in the history of podcasts.
I think I'm the only Muslim who believes that Adnan Syed is guilty. I'm sorry. I must have upset a lot of people by saying that, but I really think me and my wife always go back and forth about this subject, but I always thought Adnan Syed, if that was any one of your daughters that was murdered, that would be plenty of evidence itself to have convicted him. But just because, a lot of Muslims are saying, he's a Muslim and you got to support him. I'm like, nah.
But I think
if that was your daughter and you had all this evidence and you had that motive there,
I think you're trying to be rational and fair and saying just because he's Muslim, that's not enough to say that just for that reason that he's innocent.
But there's enough doubt there.
And my wife readily admitted, like, okay, definitely there is that huge component there that because he is Muslim, I am being more biased towards a not guilty verdict or whatever. So
Yeah,
Maybe.
I don't know. I don't know if anyone else did you follow that case at all?
I did, starting with the podcast. I did follow the case. I mean, I kind of think that there's. I don't consider myself an expert on all the facts, but I definitely think there's enough doubt that the conviction is definitely questionable. And
there is doubt.
Yeah.
I will admit that there is reasonable doubt, but I will say that there still is enough there that he was most likely the guy who did it.
I know Omar Lee is very strongly with you on that opinion.
Oh, yeah?
But with Omar Lee, you can't always tell if he's just trying to take the most controversial
Is he
opinion.
just being a troll, or
if he's
no? I'm not trying to be a troll. I'm
But
just
he's
trying to
very
think.
consistent in that view, as
Look,
well. So
But as an attorney, because there's reasonable doubt, they couldn't have convicted him based on that, right?
they should not convict him based on that. But I also I think Sim's point is good in the sense, not that we shouldn't, and I know you're not saying this, we should support people. And we should make sure everyone gets their rights, but we should also not lose sight of the victim in the case.
Yeah.
I think that's a concern that some people have. I know I kind of was in law school during the O.J. Simpson case and watching a lot of the documentaries and stuff lately. As much as there were real issues raised about police corruption, police brutality, even about some of the facts in the case, there's a ton of evidence. And the sad thing is, a lot of people who were very supportive of O.J. Simpson at the time for a variety of different reasons kind of lost sight of the fact of the two people who were dead, and things become circuses, and that's unfortunate. So
Very unfortunate.
I think a lot of the criticisms of the serial were that kind of Hae Min Lee, who was the one who has lost her life, kind of got lost in, and part of that was because her family didn't want to participate in it, and a lot of different reasons. But that's the way the world is. Yeah. Everything is complicated. There's always two sides to everything. I know even Imam Jamil Al-Amin, who's in prison, who I firmly believe is innocent for killing police officers. I know even in his statements, he makes a point of saying, that he shares the grief of the families who lost their families who were police officers, and he's saying he should be free, not because he doesn't care about the police officers, but because he didn't kill them. And I know that's something we always lose sight of. I know that a Palestinian speaker came to DePaul, and people from pro-Israel organizations were saying that she was involved many, many years ago in terrorist attacks that killed people. And the point, again, is not to say that anyone who is saying she should come and who is defending her and raising money for her, their point was not that it's okay that these people were killed. Their point was that she didn't do it. So sometimes you lose sight of that when things get kind of polarized. You think that it's the same when someone's saying someone's innocent versus someone saying like their crime doesn't matter. So I think we all share in the loss.
We're back from the tangent. Go ahead.
So Robbie, if you're listening to this podcast, we'd love to have you come on and talk about this and maybe prove Sim where he's wrong.
Exactly.
Now, back to that, Abdul Malik actually just mentioned Israel-Palestine, which is the perfect connector. So what happened is that if any of you guys can comment better on, like, we're just trying to narrate the situation. As Amr mentioned, we're not here to take any sides on this podcast. What we want to do is discuss the issues, kind of outline the best we can, the two sides from the way they would want their sides to be presented, and then kind of move forward from there.
Best practice after that. That's all
we're doing the best. And we thought about just being anonymous with names, but it's like, it's too confusing, and that way people just have an idea of who we're talking about, rather than if we just kept saying this individual. There's a lot to talk about here, and we could get it confused. So what's happened is the CIOGC, local Chicago organization, they have an annual dinner, and they have these awards, and they awarded Rabi an award for, I guess, Muslim of the Year or something like that. Like, there was a few people who got this award, and they extended this award to her. And I guess some people had found out about it, and they found out that she was getting this award, and due to her involvement with MLI, which is Muslim Leadership Initiative, which is an initiative sponsored by the Shalom Hartman Institute, which
a Zionist organization.
Yeah, which and they engaged a lot of Muslims to go to the Holy Land and basically
build the empathy with Zionism, basically. Right.
Now, a lot of people who are pro MLI have the argument has been, well, there's a lot of nuances. We're not going to just be like, Zionists are wrong, etc. We have to kind of engage them. Right now, some people would say, for example, like, one of the brothers who went, he'd say, well, you're either at the table, or you're on the plate, right? And you were at least trying to be at the table. Like, we are not in a strategic position of strength to kind of dictate the conversation. We have to at least there's a lot of nuanced arguments you could make for being on the MLI trip. And so Rabia had her position to go, and, we would certainly love to hear that perspective at some point from her. But a lot of people didn't sit well at all. They're like, you are enabling Zionism, you're selling out, etc. And this crowd came and basically, in a nutshell, put the pressure on CIOGC, and they said, well, yeah, we're not going to rescind it. One of the individuals who is definitely...
We are going to rescind it.
That's right. They did rescind it. Sorry. I misspoke there. Another very respectable individual who was kind of like against her in this was Dr. Jonathan Brown, professor of Georgetown University. Awesome individual. And he has he's always been a staunch opponent of MLI. There's always, in our community, we have, the pro MLI side, the anti MLI side. And his position was good on CIOGC for rescinding this offer, this award. Some people who said they were against MLI, but for Rabia getting the award, they're like, well, Rabia did a lot of good work with the Adnan Syed case and Serial and her book. It has nothing to do with MLI. And that's true. Dr. Brown said that's true, but it was a generic sounding award. So it kind of made it sound like you could interpret MLI was part of it. Again, I haven't researched MLI myself to understand like the nuances of it. But what happened was online as a result, now you got this huge camp like, man, Rabia got robbed, CIOGC should be ashamed of themselves. And these aren't like, and obviously Dr. Brown and Rabia are online and they're commenting, they had their stances. But you have a lot of people on the side, and Facebook, that's the thing about Facebook. You can just jump in and be like, yeah, Rabia's a sellout. That's what they say. We're not saying that she's a sellout, good on CIOGC, or some people like Dr. Brown, this is too harsh. There's no relation to it. And it's getting to the point where, this is an issue that's causing like problems, like people are going after each other in the community. So Abdul Malik is someone as a chaplain, you're dealing with a lot of people with like academia, nuanced perspectives. And you're pretty, you're online. You know what's going on. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think, it's interesting that you mentioned being a chaplain. The MLI thing actually, I know it's been controversial in the community as a whole. It's especially been something that has kind of, again, regardless of what side you're on, I think you have to agree with this, has had a very negative effect on the whole chaplaincy profession in its infancy, and hopefully we can overcome that. But I think because the Muslim who started it, working with Shalom Hartman Institute, Abdul Antepli, was the chaplain at Duke, and he, for whatever reasons, he really felt this was an important thing, in terms of and even more so, I think all the Muslims who have gone on MLI, they say that they have a strong commitment to the Palestinian cause, but they also say that part of the big reason why they're doing this is because they feel that the issue of the way Muslims are addressing the Muslim-Palestinian issue is kind of affecting all of the Muslim-Jewish relationships in America, and they think this is a problem because that's the only lens through which we kind of view our relationship with Jewish organizations in America, and they're saying long term that we need to kind of make a breakthrough in this. A lot of times people will criticize that when we have like interfaith talks with Jews, we either choose not to talk about that, or that's all we talk about, and it takes all the other possible issues that we could be talking off the table. So the idea of it is, okay, we're going to go on this, get their perspective that will help us form relationships, that will help us advance this thing. Obviously people are against it. Just for the record, I'm against it. I wouldn't go on it. And you're finding more and more, I think the consensus is, as people learn more about it and learn about the fallout from it, more and more people are being against it. Even in this discussion, most people said, like, I'm against it, but what you mentioned, that we should still give an award to Rabia Chaudhry. So that's all important to know in terms of how deeply it's affected even the chaplaincy perspective. But I do think with regard to CIOGC, the most important thing to know, and I speak this as someone who's been involved a lot with CIOGC through something called MSA Chicago, through other initiatives with youth with CIOGC. I put in a lot of hours. There's definitely people who put in more hours than me. I've never worked for them formally, but I put in a lot of hours with CIOGC. So if I mention something about CIOGC, it's not coming like from an outside critique, as we often do, like, oh, they're messed up. I'm saying as an organization that I've put a lot of work and effort into it. This is something that is a reality about CIOGC that we should notice, is that CIOGC as an umbrella organization is made up of a lot of different organizations. They're of different sizes too. But we know to a certain extent, CIOGC tries to represent a wide range of Muslim organizations. But there are a few big masajid in Chicago, which are obviously the key members of CIOGC. That's who CIOGC is. So to not listen to their complaints would not make any sense. That's like saying we're not going to listen to it was like saying like you guys not listening to yourselves about the Mad Mamluks podcast and be like, why is Maheen pressuring that Mad Mamluks shouldn't have this guest or that guest? Like he should be the one that you ask about it. So
but before we say CIOGC a little too many times, we have a lot of international listeners. So let's just explain to them. CIOCG is a organization in Chicago that represents all these other Muslim organizations that are pillars of the community, basically, right?
Yeah.
And they kind of try to bring a more unified voice to the community so that we can have a little bit more easier time following whatever opinions and basically the direction of where the community is trying to go.
And they try to do a lot of great things like, have pools zakat money to distribute to people in Chicago. They try to, do public relations campaigns to try to understand Muslims' role in Chicago community. They do interfaith work. They do a lot of youth work, as I was saying, to like help the Sunday schools that are around the community. So they do a lot of good things. The fact that if you can imagine an organization, we know how our masajid themselves are kind of dysfunctional sometimes in terms of leadership. They can be in different ways. I know you guys have talked about that before. But imagine then an organization that's made up of all these different organizations. And that's the thing that I've said, again, coming from someone who's loves CIOGC and from the inside of CIOGC, even if I disagree with some things they do, it's the nature of the organization that some different organizations in it might have different opinions about a certain thing.
Right.
And someone's opinion has to be listened to. And they went with this opinion. I will say that the fact that this MLI issue would be a big sore spot should have been known to anybody who's paying attention. May not have been known to the person whoever decided to give Rabia Chaudhry the award. They may have just been thinking of Adnan Syed, this and that. They may not even know about MLI. But people on the inside who talk about these issues a lot, they definitely knew about it. Because Rabia Chaudhry, the thing also about her, and may Allah reward her for all the good that she does, she's been not only as someone who went, a lot of the people who even went on MLI have been basically quiet about it and they don't say anything about it. And they actually try not to let people know they went on it, which says a lot in itself. Maybe they just want to avoid controversy, but that... Is
that an ongoing thing, by the way? MLI, is there...
I think so. I think it's every year there's a different cohort that goes.
Oh, really?
So I'm trying to sign up. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a nobody.
It's usually invite only.
They invite, like, it's an invite only thing, right? Like chaplains get. I think that's what Abdul Malik was alluding to. A lot of chaplains have went.
Chaplains were some of the people
have you been
were
invited?
I have actually not been invited. So I'll make that clear both for the record that I was never invited and I made clear I didn't want to go as well. So, and that's also an issue that other people have, is that this group, even the name of it is like kind of choosing to anoint people leaders, some of whom may or may not be leaders, and a lot of people who are influential in a way went on it. But that the whole question of who's influential, like they may be people who online world or in political world or in the media are influential, but they may be people that the Muslim community doesn't even know or hasn't heard of.
You're right.
And so people then start to get even more suspicious. Like I said, when people start dividing into camps, that you're appointing these people as our leaders who we don't even know. And that gets into a lot of things. So, but CIGC, I just want to say, like, I think whenever you're trying to, people, like, there's a lot of prominent members of CIGC who are very concerned about the issue of normalization. As someone who's very involved in interfaith programming, I've been well aware of these discussions for a while. Well, they will be like any kind of we had a program called Iftar in the Synagogue, which has good things in it, but they would be like, well, if you have a very strongly like Zionist synagogue that's inviting you to have iftar and say like we have iftar with the Muslims and you don't mention their support of Israel, you're kind of like creating an environment where that becomes normal, that becomes okay, that the Muslims don't mind if you do this. And one thing that came up in the discussions that maybe you brothers can comment on that I think is a very unfortunate aspect of this whole issue is that how I talked about people divide into camps. A lot of some of things around this issue where people have, where the unfortunate way that camps can be created is that obviously a lot of the people who feel most strongly about this, not the only by any means, are Palestinians themselves. And so when you have these programs that are supposed to be representing Muslims and you find a lot of non-Arab and non-Palestinian Muslims going there as Muslims to kind of represent the Muslim side of the issue, Palestinians get very upset about that.
And understandably so. I think after a certain point, there has to be a red line. And not Obama's red line, by the way. We have to have a red line where we say, there is no compromise on this issue at all. We have to have a unified stance on this. And we cannot allow a wedge to be driven between us regarding this issue. Because, yes, you might have noble intentions right now, but your next successors who take up MLI or whatever these organizations are that kind of skirt the gray zone a little, and those successors might not have hold those same type of views. Another thing that was in the news recently was CVE, that countering violent extremism. It's a program that was brought to light by I forgot the lawyer's name out of California.
It was on Muslim Matters.
Yeah, it was on Muslim Matters. It's a great blog post, Shelby. We'll talk about it more in depth later, but that was one of the criticisms that the government is trying to establish certain types of leaders who cooperate with the government, and by setting up these leaders in the community, they kind of are able to get rid of all the bad apples in the community, and not necessarily bad apples who have even done anything, but bad apples that are that might not be towing the line, basically, of the Muslim community. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's the fear people have, and I think a lot of these issues go back to what you had mentioned earlier, kind of the perspectives you'll see repeating over the different issues. And the interesting thing is that sometimes people may not be on the same side on every different issue.
Yeah.
Because some people, understand and certain issues are more important to them. And I think that is one thing, even with the MLI thing, that people have a problem with is, yes, if we have to have red lines, how can we only have red lines on certain issues? So some people would say other issues don't call to people's attention. So I know the point was made even about every Muslim achiever that got picked by CIOGC, they may have something they've done that a part of the community is upset with, and may think even it's a red line. But we don't. But the question is, what becomes the things that we can't ignore versus things that we'd say, look, we disagree with this, but that's not what the award is about. So it's an interesting discussion. Yeah. Same with CVE. The discussion becomes, okay, the government is going to be putting money into trying to stop extremism in our community. We don't want extremism in our community. Why shouldn't we be part of talking to them and getting the funds that they're using, and we can actually help direct the discussion and help try to take out the corruption of it. That's, some people naturally go in with that mindset. Other people naturally go in with the mindset of, the government is like entrapping people. The government doesn't have good intentions. Prosecutors, all they care about is putting people in jail. They're not trying to help any young Muslim man who's a little confused. They're trying to encourage him to go further and further extreme so they can lock him up. So they'll say, like, why would we even touch this with a 10-foot pole? Like, we should have no part in it. Also, especially as imams or chaplains or scholars, this will make nobody will come to us if they're having thoughts that they should come to us about because they think we're going to call the FBI on them or something. Yeah. So
Palestine is more specific, I think, with community, with the Muslims in general, because it's a unifying issue across boundaries around the whole world. Muslims are they've kind of rallied around Palestinian cause, whether they've done anything for it or not, whether their government has formed a treaty with Israel or not. It doesn't matter. The majority, the big body of the Ummah itself has come out in support of the Palestinian cause, and it seems like enough is enough in terms of the amount of killing that the Israelis have done. So I think that's where I'm kind of more skeptical of this whole MLI program, where I really want to sit down with someone who has participated in these programs to kind of pick their brain and want to understand where they're coming from, because I'm not going to assume that, they're seeking the destruction of the Palestinian cause, I'm going to assume the best from them. I want to get behind where are you coming from? What wisdom or what benefit do you feel like it will come from this engagement?
I agree. And that's really actually a beautiful thing that I don't think I hope we don't lose sight of in any of these discussions. When I look at the Palestine, as much we can still criticize, have Muslims been effective? Are Muslims doing enough? But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's actually a very beautiful thing that so many members of the community, including people who have no like ethnic ties or racial ties to the issue, are very emotionally concerned. I think that's exactly true of what you're saying. They're very emotionally connected to it. It matters to them. They may or may not know a lot about it. They may or may not be able to do a lot about it, but it matters to a lot of them. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And we don't want to lose sight of that with this. I think what some people would like to see when they say, like, why is this the only issue, is that kind of attention given to other issues. Yeah. A lot of people like to see that people have the same understanding of an education and connection to Kashmir, or to what's going on right now in Yemen, or to the plight of like foreign workers in Gulf countries. And there's so many issues that involve a lot of Muslims that we can expand our level of concern, and it doesn't take away from our level of concern that we have shown for certain issues.
But I think there's a brand that the Palestine-Israel issue has too that expands even to non-Muslims. Like, how many non-Muslim pro-Palestinian activists do we know? Like, there's a lot out there. Yeah. So I think that's another thing. It's because of there's a brand, almost a brand to it. Yeah. That it's different than CVE. Like, non-Muslims would probably be like, yeah, CVE sounds like a great thing. You guys have extremists, and a lot of these attacks are carried out by Muslims, right? And a lot of Muslims look at it the same way. Like, yeah, we need to like remove these bad apples. And the problem is, but then there's nuances that Abdul Malik alluded to, that there's prosecutors that get paid off getting throwing people in jail, etc. There's ulterior motives involved that. Not because they're anti-Muslim, they're just trying to get paid and build their own reputation, build their career.
Yeah. That's how they make money, man.
You know what I mean? So the next issue that's kind of popped up is this issue of sexual abuse and sexual health, etc. online. We have one of our brothers, Daniel Hakikat Jew. I think I butchered his last name. So
no, you got it.
You got it. He's made some posts on Facebook about some commentary on, for example, a certain sexual abuse case, and how there has been some legal issues he feels, and it's not as cut and dry, etc. And then he made some posts about his commentary on some sexual I would say sex ed stuff posed by some Muslim sisters, and that what I want to talk about on that because we're gonna have Daniel on the show. We'll talk about the content in depth, but the actual vitriol is what I would say. People went in hard on him. Like, people were calling, like, they're like, you have no right to talk about sexual health, this and that. You're not qualified. People have issues. And then, and that's where you get the really below the belt thinking. And this prompted a response by, Sheikh Omar Suleiman. He didn't mention anybody by name, but he just says that he's like, we're not talking about adab here. There's a lack of basic humanity of how Muslims deal with each other on social media. That we all we see is a face and a name and maybe a profile picture. But like, you guys don't understand the way you talk to each other. This is your brother and sister in Islam. Like, you may disagree, but this has gotten out of hand. And I've seen some real nasty stuff online. Abdul Malik, some of these people, personally, as do I, and you're kind of like, well, I met them in person. They're good people, but what's going on here? It's just like, it's gotten so nasty in the social sphere. I was talking to Mike Slice about this last week, cause Mike had popped up on, Facebook. He's not really on social media too much. And Mike was like, I log on and I see the kind of like backbiting and slander and just straight up, like we gotta get our like online presidents together, man. Like, what's going on here? And I think that's what you alluded to in the past. Like, hey, we're on the same team here. What's happening? Like, we're just being like, I don't know if other communities even have this issue. Like, do the Christians have like this kind of drama online where people are just like slinging insults back and forth, and people just make assumptions, and it's all about looking good on social media because it's this big platform. No one wants to like lose the debate.
Yeah, I think part of it is a social media thing. So I think other communities do have them. A lot of times, if you're not part of that community, you're not part of it, or you wouldn't understand it even if you read it. Same if a non-Muslim came across some of our discussions, they may or may not naturally lean to one side or the other, but they probably wouldn't really understand what was going on. Similarly, that's true of other communities. But I do think there's a lot of. I was also I'm glad you mentioned Sheikh Omar Suleiman's piece, because for whatever reason, it's not like he was saying anything new or anything that maybe other people weren't saying, but maybe it's just knowing him and knowing his sincerity, as far as I can tell, and just how beautiful he is when you interact with him. But that piece really struck me and really like it kind of moved me a little bit to think about these issues. And what I think he touched on was not only the very basic fact that like the basic definition of a Muslim is the one from whose tongue and hands that other Muslims feel safe. And we know that, especially online, nobody feels that way. Nobody feels safe from other Muslims. And what does that mean? And that's not a technical issue. That's like a basic idea of what does it mean to have a community. And I think one thing I really started reflecting on when he said like everyone's just a name and a picture, like you're not someone, and is that I started thinking of really the power of like a congregational salah, to be honest, is what I really started thinking of, because in the past, if I think of, in the MSA setting or in my family even or whatever, I've just thought of when we go through times where there's different people that you're making congregational salah with on a regular basis versus people that you never make salah with, the relationship is different. Your relationship is completely different. Wow. If you come in and just have an argument with somebody, versus if we came in and we all made salah together, or we all shared a meal together, and then we started discussing something, how different would our discussion be?
Yes.
Or if we've struggled, and that's the beautiful thing, like when you're seeking knowledge or when you're involved in service work or something, when you spend all day working on something, getting tired with somebody, and then an issue comes up when you're sharing food, that's a different discussion than just someone that you're just getting online with and you don't know anything about them. Like Sheikh Omar mentioned, you don't know what they're going through. You don't know their past history. And I know Daniel tried to talk about this, and maybe he can talk about it on the show. You don't know what he's dealt with in his family or what he's experienced. So just to assume that because someone says something that you find offensive, that they don't understand anything, that's a bad assumption to make. And this is one thing about our cliques that we kind of get in that is a danger. We get in a clique of people who agree with us and who are always like cheering us on when we're taking on the other people. And we start to think we're the only ones who really care about something and everyone else doesn't. And even if they're right, like on the Palestinian MLI thing, even if they're completely right and I agree with them, they have to be aware of that danger and not think, oh, anyone who disagrees with us on this doesn't care about Palestine or doesn't care about this or that. That's a dangerous thought process to leap to. So similarly, someone shouldn't say, in my experience, because like you said, I do know those people and I've supported their efforts, my experience with people who are trying to work on some of these sexual assault and sexual health issues has been that, yeah, they may have certain perspectives that I don't necessarily 100% agree with. They're in like a vanguard, they're in a groundbreaking stage where they're taking trainings and information that's mainly available from non-Muslims. And that's where they learn it. And then they're trying to use it in our community, which they love and they're a part of. And so their perspective may be different at first, and some people may not 100% agree with their perspective. That's important. I've had my own concerns, but I think, I will say even myself personally, as someone who was, as we talked about the last thing, I was a lawyer for people, families who are dealing with abuse and neglect for many years. As someone, and as we all in a community, we all have our own experiences with these issues. I found some of Daniel's articles, to be very problematic even from my own perspective. And that I know him, I presented with him at Ilm Summit before. Like in some ways, I think he's raising issues that need to be raised, but he said things that just the tone of it, I didn't really understand. So I wasn't surprised that people responded
like from like a harshness perspective or being provocative. You would say?
Part of it, like I said, just losing sight of, perhaps losing sight of the victims, perhaps. And I know part of this is his whole brand, kind of this Muslim skeptic thing. Like, I'm going to question what you think you know, and I'm going to do it in a very bald way. And he's even talked about how part of he wants to do is to deliberately come across in a very strong way to kind of wake people up. But I think when you're dealing with things,
that was always Daniel's charm, though. With me, that's why he and with you too. Look, I like guys who are bold and strong because we're a society, and I'm guilty of this too. A society that always couches our language, is so careful of not trying to offend anyone. Come on, let's just sit together and talk like adults. And what drives me nuts is that, okay, having this back and forth dialogue, having it over social media, that's what drives me nuts. Let's have some sort of third-party, neutral Switzerland area. The Mad Mamluks will be volunteers for this. If anyone wants to set up a place, a meeting place where we can all kind of sit on a meeting table and sort this stuff out, rather than bringing laymen into a lot of these discussions and getting them involved. And it just becomes a little social media war of my followers versus yours. Who's got more? Who can spew the most, the best comebacks or whatever, you know?
And we understand once you have over 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 followers, that when a concept that is very, what you may think is disastrous or destructive, you want to protect your followers from them. We completely understand that. We're giving you that benefit of the doubt. But the way we deal with each other on social media, if we're individuals that are from, whether we're activists, Islamic activists, whether we're scholars, whether we're chaplains, as you were mentioning, we have to have a completely different way of conducting ourselves, because it's going to be, everyone's going to absorb that, and everyone's going to understand that. And your followers are going to inevitably become cultish. It's just the way the world works. It's very unfortunate. So me and Sim were talking about this before the podcast even started, is that, we should definitely be a part of an initiative, and we're definitely going to encourage an initiative where we have a group or a council of individuals get together, just get inside of a room and just talk about things that are troubling you, and don't let the individuals that aren't specialists get emotionally invested in such a thing. Yeah. Because they're the ones who have to take the hit, because it's many, many numbers. You want to limit the damage as much as possible, especially in the stage that we're in right now.
Yeah, we need that level to have those kind of discussions. I agree, because I've often said, the problem with our community, people say, on social media, people argue too much, or people just discuss and this and that. The problem in our community is that we don't have the discussions we need to have in a serious way.
Yeah.
And we have them in a way that's harmful and not helpful.
Yes.
So it's not that we should just stop having the discussions. We need to have these discussions, but we need to have them in a more productive way. And that requires a level of trust. And unfortunately, when you have no trust with someone, then what is even the point of the discussion? It loses its point, and it becomes very harsh. Like, for example, some of the sisters and that I was mentioning who run those organizations working on, I've attended their events. Like, you can even just tell, and this is the reality of our community. They know where I stand on certain things. Even just looking at me, they know, I'm not the typical person who's involved in their programs, but I have this background, that background. They've always been receptive to saying, what is your feedback? What are your suggestions? They're not people who are just saying, we know everything and we're just doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
But then if you come from someone who they don't trust, who doesn't seem to care about the people that they're trying to work and help, but just wants to cast doubts on things that to them are not doubtful, for a reason that they can't understand. And then, like you said, with these followers, one thing that I found very distressing, and I think even Daniel commented on it, in saying that, even if you agree with me, watch your tone and this and that, is that being someone who dealt with kind of the Breitbart, alt-right atmosphere, and they came after me, and you see now in the presidential campaign, they're running the Trump campaign now. Unfortunately, I started to see elements of a Muslim alt-right bro culture that forms online, that kind of is we're against feminism, we're against liberalism, we're against this and that, all concerns that I've mentioned, that I've had of my own in the past, but that's all they know, and all they want to do is, then these people are enemies and we're going to go after them, and we're going to do it in a very way that doesn't care about their feelings, that's not trying to help anybody, and really it's not a good look.
Yeah.
It doesn't convince anyone. In fact, it does the opposite.
Yeah.
It takes people like me who agree with your arguments and say, I don't want to be identified with these guys.
Yeah.
It's really a difficult issue that I hope. And now we know, because Daniel's doing a lot of good work with Yakin Institute and stuff, this really has the potential to really harm the goodness of the work that he's doing if people don't understand where he's coming from. And we all have to know that. We all have to look ourselves in the mirror and try to understand, are we, in the way we interact with people, are we serious about these issues?
We have huge problems in our community in terms of some of the attacks that are coming from neo-atheists and the alt-right. And I mean, though, the priorities of our community, it seems like, what world are you living in? Because being a person who had to struggle with a lot of these ideas from atheism and whatnot, just growing up in this country, I felt like, man, if there was a institute like Yaqeen Institute when I was young,
Oh yeah.
I would have been, so many things would have been made easy. I would be talking nonsense, with scholars, and they would be like, they didn't even know how to approach some of the questions I had with regards to, Islamic theology, the existence of God, destiny, and where we're headed, what's our meaning in life, and science, and all that jazz. But
That's super high priority, what you just mentioned, though. I mean, we're losing our children to atheism and not believing in God. And again, another perfect topic. That's why we shed light on this Halloween thing. And people are going to fight over Halloween, dude.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
and your kids are literally saying, "God, Dad, I don't believe in God. I don't think there's a such thing." But one thing I wanted to add to the whole internet thing, just to slightly change the topic. But one thing I realized is that after we got social media in a very organized fashion, it's as if we saw a few different things forming, right? Number one, human beings never dealt with such a virtual world where people can actually have their own life on Facebook and social media and be a completely different individual and person. Like, that phenomenon has never occurred before, I think, to my knowledge. And what that did was, in the beginning, I don't know if you guys remember when Facebook first came out and it got really popular, the genius of the idea that it is, that we're like, dude, this guy, we know this guy, he's so religious, his sister, he's so religious, but they're posting pictures of themselves at a club and all that kind of stuff on Facebook. You remember that started? At first, it kind of started as that, and then it started, that started like, we're like, okay, whatever, it is what it is, we're all human beings. But we started realizing that it almost brought about the multiple personalities that people have. And that, I think, was kind of it's unfortunate, but it was kind of a benefit at the same time, that we understand what's happening in our society, that we have individuals that may carry themselves in public in a certain way, which is totally fine, but they have a complete different life that they probably always wanted to have on social media, which is totally fine. That's cool. We all have our weaknesses. And what that did was that, and this is the point that I'm talking about, is now their life on social media was devoid of akhlaq and adab, but in real life they had very high adab and very high akhlaq. So it's something that I think all of us are kind of dealing with, and all of us understand, and we see this, which is why I think, especially as far as scholars are concerned, they have to be extremely careful, or individuals like activists or imams or chaplains, people of authority and people of influence, they have to have that same personality on social media and outside of social media. I think it's extremely important.
This is a very beautiful point. Let me just quickly say this, because I want to hear that I think in the short term, you might think, especially in social media, on the short term, you might think, man, if I really make a point hard, or if I really go against like the people that we're against, that will make people love me more. Like, that will make people, like, my fans will get even more excited. Yeah. That's short term. Long term, I believe this. And I believe this because this is part of our deen or whatever. Long term, what wins people over is adab and akhlaq, whether it's in person or online or whatever. The people who constantly show that kind of good character and treatment of others and sincere concern for even the people who disagree with them, even the people who are doing wrong, those are the type of people that will win the hearts over the long term. And I've told this story on Facebook before, but I think it's something I always come back to in my mind because it represents it. Like, when I was a very new Muslim and I was, had certain views and was with people who had those views, where we would reinforce ourselves. And we went to an event, and Sheikh Jamal Badawi was speaking there. And some of the people who I came there with, they were raising like points against him, like critiquing him, this and that. And in response, his followers were like going back and like, just kick them out, like get rid of them. We hate these people, blah, blah. The people were being very heated, and I was still relatively new. So I was like, these are the guys I kind of agree with, but I don't really understand, like, this environment was getting very heated. And I was like, there's obviously a lot more going on here than just the issue itself, even though the issue is important. But what I always said is that all I could do was, in all that chaos, all I could do was look at Sheikh Jamal Badawi, and he was so calm the whole time. And he was just sitting there so calm. And he was actually telling his followers, like, calm down. We can talk about this. Yes. It's not a problem. These are our brothers. They have a concern. Let's speak about it. Yeah. We don't need to kick them out. You don't need to yell at me. Like, let's all just talk. And it's easy to say that that's how you should respond, but to actually respond in the middle of that, and I'm sure that's not the first time or last time that happened to him, but he was trained to keep maintaining that calm and responding. And I, as someone who came with that, what was supposedly on the other side of him on the issue, I don't even remember like who was saying what about the issue we were debating. All I remember is that this is the person that I want to be like in this discussion.
There you go, man. There you go.
This is who I want us to be. So our community, that adab is, so we, even when we're talking about neo-atheism and all these things, and I love Yaqeen Institute, I love Omar Suleiman, we have to put out papers, we have to discuss this. At the end of the day, I believe even more important than the arguments we make is it that we create people that people say, I want to be like that person.
Yes.
And that's the most important thing. And then you can explain, if I know I want to be like you, and then you can explain to me, here's how you understand this issue, I'll listen to you. Yeah. But if I know I don't want to be like you, even if you're making perfect sense and logic, I will say, like I said, I don't want to be on the side of these people because these people they're not showing the character that I want to see.
And I think that's one thing about leadership. I'm going to link this definitely to leadership, is that individuals, whether they're in a heated argument or debate, or you see them, when they're off air, whatever the case may be, when they're off duty, these individuals that can, have high level of adab and akhlaq, those are individuals that are leader material. Not the individual that has the best arguments, not the individual that has the most followers. And I'm not taking a dig at anybody specifically. I'm just talking about a very important concept to me. It's the
and one thing about the Mad Mamluks, we don't take hidden digs at anyone.
Yeah.
We'll call you out if you want.
Yeah. And even then, we're not going to be negative about it. We're just human beings trying to help each other. But that being said, if we want to know, to me, if you were to ask me, hey, human beings, naturally, we need a leader. Wherever you are, human beings always need leaders and a leader, right? If you want to know who it is, it's the individual who has the highest level of adab and akhlaq at the time where he has the most right to be angry. At the time where he's like, man, this is an easy kill. I can just easily make fun of this person. But that person takes another approach and use it as a learning experience. So we have to look out for these individuals because they're very few now. And those individuals outside of social media and in social media, how do they conduct themselves? That's an individual that we should be scouting after to be in charge of initiatives in our community.
Well, not to praise you in person, but Abdul Malik, I really feel like you're one of those, because you're able to connect with so many different communities. People know where you stand on issues, right? Like you had mentioned the sisters that run the thing with the sexual education, etc. That they're still comfortable with you. They know that you might have a stance that disagrees, but everyone is still comfortable. I think that's a beautiful characteristic.
That's why he's here, man. He's a romantic Salafi.
The other thing I wanted to touch upon is I feel like podcasting is actually a very practical way to have like these kind of adab-filled conversations, because you bring that human element in, even if it's over Skype. Yeah. When you're talking to somebody versus, we're trying to win an argument on Facebook. And an example of this is, one of our good friends, a former guest, Dubai's finest, Nabil Aziz.
He got in trouble with this dude.
Now, Nabil, I don't know if Abdul Malik, Nabil. Nabil's like a hardcore anti-feminist, right? So we had Nabil on the show. But I listened to another podcast that Nabil did with a sister from the podcast Not Guilty, No Way. Mm-hmm. Very pro-feminist sister. But listen to that podcast. They actually the both points were articulated very well. They got along. It wasn't, no one's slamming each other. Yeah. Right? And he was another podcast called Between Arabs. I think Daniel was on that show as well. And when you listen to these, that's when you really understand both sides of the situation. Yeah. Because there isn't what we call the slogan rhetoric. Yeah. You know what I mean? That we have in our community. Because people are just talking. They've humanized each other. Yeah. And when on social media, we have dehumanized each other. Yeah. That's what's really happened. So I think, podcasting is a great avenue. So I think a lot of people who want to.
We got into some, trouble with Nabil's podcast, but I think a lot of people who understood that podcast kind of understood, that Nabil was kind of talking about people who kind of wrap themselves around the label feminism. And he was kind of talking about that, but he wasn't going after women's rights at all. And I think that the conversation didn't come across the way it was supposed to, or it was intended to. But I mean, for example, I didn't even get to even talk about this on that podcast. Me and my daughters will play basketball. We'll go snowboarding, and we're doing all these kind of things that are traditionally, women or daughters don't do with their dad. Does that make me a feminist? I want to say no, because it just makes me a person who, or our father who cares about his daughters, who wants to be able to optimize his relationship with their daughters, make them be able to do what they feel like they can do, and not being told that, oh, you're a girl and you can't do that.
Exactly.
I don't like the word feminism because it means so many different things to so many people. And nowadays, you hear about feminists who say, if I hold the door open for you, I am doing a mild form of triggering where I am exerting my male dominance and opening the door for you. Like, this is
as if I can't do it myself. That's what it is.
It's gotten to a level of absurdity, you know, and you don't know what these labels mean anymore. And I think some of these nuanced discussions get lost under, you know, people labeling themselves as feminist or liberals or whatever it is, you know.
And I would say trouble's a very big word. I don't think we got in trouble by anything.
Not really.
I'm just saying.
There were some people upset.
We had some people upset because I think I use that podcast as a platform for my future stand-up comedy career. You know, and I kind of let loose a little bit, but you know, Nabil, we love you, man. We definitely want to get you back in here for sure. I know he listens to all our shows.
Yeah, I just. You know, we touched on this briefly, but again, I know it's difficult because we don't know how much detail we want to get into about things. Someone who isn't on Facebook all the time, like I am, maybe this like really confused by now. But what I will just say, as someone again who worked as a lawyer for many years, and specifically with victims of abuse, I will say our brother Daniel's post, which I if you guys can get him on to talk, maybe we can understand better where he's coming from. But I'm someone again who knew him personally and seemed to share some concerns with him about liberalism and feminism and all these things. Just in terms of as ideologies, the Muslim community has to realize if you're buying into these ideologies, they may not be completely consistent with Islam. Just like if someone said, like, I'm a communist and because I want to help the poor, and Islam is for helping the poor, but not everything in communism obviously is consistent with Islam. So you have to understand when you really buy into ideologies that they have a full range of viewing the world, which may not be completely consistent. So I always encourage my students to really explore that. So I like the fact that he wanted to explore those issues, and he was kind of strong about it. But when he made a post about a local case here involving a specific person, Maulana Salim, and again, even after this person had already pled guilty, you know, there was a long history of what was going on in the case. He still wrote a post basically making all about, don't think he's guilty. He can't be, you know, there's no proof. There's no evidence. Getting into really, and I think reading that, and I think that, you know, I could put myself, because that's how I saw it myself. Yeah. In the point of view of some other people, seeing it that he was, like we talked about before, seemed to be losing sight of the victims in the case, seemed to be making an abstract point.
Here's what I'll tell you about Daniel, is that he wants people to look at things rationally. I know pretty well that he's not affiliated with Maulana Abdullah Salim's followers in general, or he's not like a student of the Indian or subcontinent schools or whatnot. Daniel's main point is he wants to get people to think critically, and his website is just called that, this Muslim Skeptic, I think. And I'm not sure how well he is, well informed he is, or how passionate he
What
is.
state is he from? What state is he from?
He's from Texas, so okay. I think Dallas. Now he moved.
So he's a ways from here, though.
But he's from New England originally. I think Boston area, and then moved to Texas.
But inshallah, we'll bring Daniel on, and we'll talk to him about these type of things.
Yeah. So the only point I want to make, I guess, specifically was that, as someone who's aware, he used in that post a lot of general things about the legal system and about how not everyone who pleads guilty is guilty. There's reasons why people plead guilty, all of which are true.
True, yeah. But
as someone who is a lawyer, knowing that that's true and those are important points to bring out, in my understanding, that's not what was going on in this case. And in fact, actually, it is very difficult to convict people of sexual abuse crimes. Far from being easy, far from being something where the accused person has all these advantages. In fact, in this case, the accused person was a person that had a very strong community support, a very high reputation, which, as it seemed to allow him to get away with doing things that were harmful to people in our community for a long period of time because of maybe other good things he was doing, because of his reputation in the community. And finally, because of some brave people were able to stand up and really see it through, we were able to at least try to protect people and get the problem from stopping. And for someone to come and then say, like, you shouldn't, it just seemed very disrespectful. And I even found it disrespectful to the real problems that the criminal justice system has, and to the real people who are facing abuse in the criminal justice system, to make this person to be the poster child of how the criminal justice system is corrupt, because he shouldn't be. And I feel the same way about OJ. who, maybe, you could point out the OJ case brought up a lot of good issues, but at the end of the day, OJ was not the person who people should be sympathetic with in that situation.
That's why I talked about None Say It too, is that we have to look at the facts. We can't be, we get caught up in our love for someone, and we lose sight of what the facts are. And in order for us to get out of this hole where we're kind of always following a leader, and then he ends up falling. I remember one of our first heroes, all of ours, regardless of religion, was Michael Jordan. And when Michael Jordan, ended up cheating on his wife and whatnot, you're like, oh man, what a terrible dude, And you're like, and there's 10 other heroes that have fallen, and it seems like it's a daily thing now. But when we start following ideas instead of people, I think we as a society will just in general progress, right?
I hope so too. And I always think, again, to bring my romantic side into it, I always think emotions and people are important. Just always look in the situation. Are you siding with the more powerful person or the less powerful person? And if you're siding with the more powerful person, be a little tricky. It doesn't mean the powerful people are always wrong, or they can't be like your friend or your teacher or something. That's good that you support those people, but always realize that there's a danger in like people ganging around the people who are weak and vulnerable. And so you're always, if there's a doubt, I would always side with the person who's weak and vulnerable in that situation. And people may not always agree who that is. The last thing I did want to mention is on these whole issues, it's actually ironic in a way, but some of the reason that there's so much drama in the Muslim social media sphere, I think ironically, and no one will believe this if you first say that, but hear me out, is because the community is more unified than we think. It's only because we see ourselves as one community that we get so upset about certain things. For another example, like there's another small community in the US, a Jewish community, okay? The Jewish community, if Jerry Seinfeld is like on TV and becomes like the most popular Jew and they feel he's not religious or he doesn't identify with this or that, no Jewish people are upset about that. Because they know that, like, okay, we have certain people who are very religious, certain people who are secular, certain people who are into arts and entertainment. They all do what they want to do. We don't feel like every time a Jewish person is on TV, they're representing the whole community, and we have to get upset.
That's very interesting.
Well, the Muslims, we do kind of feel that way. So why did people get so upset that a sister is doing an interview in Playboy magazine? Because we felt like, oh, when she does that, she's representing like every Muslim and she's representing me. So if I disagree with it, I have to say something about it or something like that. Yeah. So because we have a certain unity in our community, now the danger that we're really on the brink of, and it might sound, I like that we see ourselves as one community, but we're on the brink where we start splitting up. So, in other communities, like I spend a lot of time around Catholics.
Man, let me help you out because I like Hamza Yusuf. I like Siraj Waj. I like Yasser Qadi. But you know what happens? Because I love everyone, I get hated by everyone too at the same time. Yeah. And it's this evil plague that is incessant.
You gotta pick a side, Sim.
Yeah, pick a side.
Wishy-washy. Yeah. What are you, undecided on your life?
Exactly.
See, because here's the thing.
Because you know what? Just for the listeners, I've been part of all these camps.
Yeah.
So I know what all these people who think they have like tens and 50,000 followers, I know them very well, and they're just human beings like everyone else. And we have to, at a certain point, start evaluating ideas. And
yes, because I think what's going to happen, and this may have already started to happen to some extent, what's going to happen is that people are going to be like, people are already forming into cliques, and then the cliques like argue with each other or look at each other suspiciously. Then at some point, someone says like, forget this, man. Why don't we just be separate? Like, from now on, the liberal Muslims, we don't care what you conservative Muslims say. Like, instead of keeping upset about it, we're just going to say we're different than you. We're the progressive Muslims. We're going to have our masjid. We're going to base ourselves on what we want to think about. We're not going to worry about you guys anymore. And the conservative Muslims will do the same thing. Like, forget you guys.
Exactly.
We're not going to be upset about you guys anymore. We're not going to. And it would be similar to like, what we have with like madhabs or even schools of Aqidah. It would be silly if every single issue that came up in the masjid, you have the Hanafis and the Shafis arguing with each other about like, should we be Hanafi or Shafi? Yeah. At some point you decide like, okay, we're following this. we're following that. It doesn't mean everyone following this agrees on everything, but we have certain agreements where we can speak the same language. Our community, sometimes we're having discussions where people are speaking different languages to each other, and it doesn't lead to a conclusions. But instead of separating completely, what we have to do is realize that, like I talked about congregational salah, like I talked about charity and service, like I talked about different things, we can be one community and still like know how to unite and how we can still be different on certain issues and stay united as a community. And that's what we have to do. And that's the challenge in the future. My challenge, I used to think my challenge before was to try to keep everyone together. I'm realizing you can't keep everyone together. Like you're saying, you end up just getting hated by everyone. You end up wondering if I'm not being strong enough on this or that issue. But we can still keep being in that place when people just start hating on the other people. Be that guy that tells them, look, man, I'm with you. I don't agree with what they're doing, but remember, they're still Muslims. Make dua for them. Yeah. You know, they have a lot of good. Tell the other people some good things you know about the people that they may not know. Different things you can do. We can all do this for each other. And that's one of the reasons why all these issues were bubbling. I got a little like Omar Suleiman, we get a little frustrated. We're like, why does we always have to go through this? How long are we going to go through this? I didn't know what to do. I wanted to say something, but at the same time, I didn't want to just contribute to it. That's why I was glad to come on this podcast, because I feel you guys are with the Mad Mamluks are trying to do that, trying to keep people together, but also talk about issues, not ignore issues, talk about them, but try to keep the community together. So that's why I took this opportunity to kind of share my thoughts on it. But that's the big picture that we have to keep our mind on.
Don't you think we have a little bit of a crazy conspiracy mindset too, where we think the other side is trying to break the religion or trying to deviate Muslims? Like, for example, people who we quote unquote call liberals, they see other problems in the religion or in the Muslim community, and they want to address, for example, sex education with people who are, who are practicing unsafe sex and not making the best decisions in their life. They're intending their message towards that type of audience. And then what happens is people who pick up on it and say, well, this message, are you trying to corrupt our, my innocent daughter who has never partaken in any of these activities? What is your overall, agenda? Do you understand what I'm saying? We kind of have this kind of idea that there's people out there, and by the way, there are people who want to destroy the religion. There's no doubt about that. Right. But we can't assume that about people. We have to assume the best about them, and then understand where they're coming from, how they're evaluating the reality of Muslims.
That's exactly why we need this trust. And I think you're 100% right, because instead of just seeing that, oh, these people may not have thought about how this could have a bad effect, or these people may not have thought about how this may be problematic, like in terms of Islam. Some people run right away to think like these people just want to destroy Islam or something. Again, I think if we were together, if we had salah together, if we had, if we did social service work together, if we did other things we agree upon together, this is what the Prophet ﷺ focused on when he first came to Medina. He focused on these social things of feeding each other, sharing food with each other, helping the poor, praying at night, sincerity in our own selves. Once you start having that, you don't start seeing, because that's a lesson that I learned early on, because I used to have these because you'd see, when you look at it from an academic perspective, you see the community going in a certain direction. You don't want it to happen. This is why people get like reactionary and conservatives get upset, because they see bad things happening and they want to stop it. You have to realize first, we have to establish trust of people that that's not their intention. And if someone's doing something unintentionally wrong, there's a different way of addressing them than if they're doing something intentionally wrong. And then second, we have to have more trust in Allah. Yeah. We have to say this religion is not going to be destroyed by these people. If we have trust in Allah, if we're sincere in ourselves, then we know that Allah will protect this religion just like He's protected from bigger challenges than feminism or liberalism or any other things, which are, in the end of the day, to be honest, those things are well-intentioned things which may have problems. They are not, the conspiracies to destroy us that are out there are not those things. Yeah, and so we can't lose sight of that.
No, and even that, it's a simple, very, very simple, elementary concept that no one's going to destroy Islam. We have to understand that. No one's going to destroy Islam. There are going to be waves of individuals like throughout history that talk about certain concepts that may seem very alien to you. Some of them may be outright completely against Islam, but no one's hijacking Islam. Islam is not going anywhere.
Right.
It's a very simple thing.
Right. Abdul Malik, you had alluded to a point about like maybe all the conservative Muslims uniting and then the liberals or the progressives in separating these camps. And in the past, in our, like, the last 20 years, we had the Sufi Salafi camps, right? But now it's like, we've seen something recently where perhaps, like, the practicing from both the Sufis and the Salafis will unite. And then those people who weren't in that conversation are like, well, these guys don't represent us. And the example I want to highlight is about a month ago, there was a imams meeting in, Houston. And these weren't all necessarily all trained ulama, etc., but definitely activists and scholars. The likes of Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah, Dr. Yasser Qadi, Dr. Sherman Jackson, Imam Zaid Shakir, Sheikh Walid Basyouni, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, who 15 years ago, you would never see people like this, at this diversity in the same room, right? And they were taking pictures and like holding hands and stuff. So, looks like a very positive thing in our community. And at the same time, but then you see people coming out and saying, well, where was the female representation? You know, they obviously they don't even think of inviting us. You know what I mean? And, you know, and people try to counter and say, well, you know, maybe, I mean, we acknowledge there are women scholars in America. We talked about it before. Sheikh Muslima Permal, for example, she was your classmate, right? At Azhar?
Yeah.
Right. So, like, I mean, you know, I think that's where, I think we're aware of it. But I think sometimes we're like, well, maybe that wasn't, when they're trying to, you know, come together, despite their various ideological differences, they're not thinking about inviting sisters, perhaps, but maybe that's our male privilege speaking out. But, like, is this a big issue, or should we something that we should be cognizant of for future
And I'd like
meetings?
to add one thing is that, yes, there is that one or two Muslim scholar, female Muslim scholars that we all know of, but the argument would be more valid if there were 50 female Muslim scholars, and you know, you don't know that whether they reached out to that one sister. I don't know who
yeah, we don't, but I think there are 50. I think based upon the criterion of who was there, I don't think there was like a set like criteria. Like there was people from all levels of knowledge or activism invited to that meeting. Cause like you saw the picture of who was there.
I think he's saying there could have been even activists that were females.
Right. You know what I mean? So like the whole like, you know, I think if we were saying, okay, this has to be, you have to be ulama, etc., like, at this level of knowledge, that's a different story, right? But, you know, I don't think we can play that argument because if you look at, like, who was invited to that meeting, you've got people from various backgrounds, you know, of a scholarly level, but, like, I would venture to say there are probably 50 females, you know, in the United States that have that would cut the criteria for that.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add on to that, I'm sorry, I know there's a lot for you to answer and talk about. The one thing is that I don't think that there's individuals that are intentionally not wanting to contact females. I think on their own time, they probably do contact female scholars and say, hey, what's going on? What should we do? And how should we do this? And I've been a witness of that. I know how that happens, but is it that when they do get together and they have this, do they have to invite someone that's a female? And I'm not saying there's any right or wrong answer to this, but I'm just thinking out loudly that if there's a group of guys that want to get together and they just want to talk about certain things amongst guys, and they're not saying by any means that, hey, we don't get in touch with female scholars and we talk to them and get direction from them. They're just having a gathering with a bunch of dudes that want to get together and talk about stuff. You know what I'm saying? Does that mean by any means that they're disrespecting women? No. Are they intending to? No. They have men and women in mind when they want to make certain decisions and want to better themselves. You know what I'm saying? And I think that sometimes, when somebody's doing something very well, and we were talking about this before the show, when someone's doing something very well, and then you're just going to say, you know, well, we're all the female scholars, and you're just going to throw everything all over everything they've done, you know. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't sit well with me right now. Maybe you guys can convince me, but you know what I'm saying?
No, I feel you. And I think some of this goes back to the point I made about how, people look at the meeting, and some of it has to do with, like, what was this meeting? Like, I don't know. Yeah,
what are they even talking about?
Most of us don't. It wasn't really clear. Like, the picture was posted, which was, I agree with you, was supposed to be a very feel-good picture and a very positive picture about people that you would be surprised that they're together. And that, like, gives us hope, like, in the feeling of all this, like, division and stuff, that these people are being sincere and they're wanting something good for the community as a whole, and they're willing to put aside personal differences or whatever, and they keep the eye on the ball of what's important. And that makes us feel good. But immediately the questions became like, who was invited to this thing? It was too many people to really be just a few friends hanging out.
Yeah.
Like, it obviously required a lot of planning and a lot of talking to people, because you're not just going to invite someone to show up and, like, be like, oh, Dr. Omar, did you know that Walid Basyouni was going to be here? Like, you would let everyone know ahead of time.
Of course.
So it was obviously well planned. And they told them what was the point of it. Maybe it was just social. Maybe it was just like, let's get to know each other. Like I said, to establish that trust amongst ourselves. Who knows what it was? I don't know what it was. I wasn't invited. So it was, but it was a little unclear. So some of the pictures, people are like, these are the American Muslim leaders, or this is the people who represent us. And some sisters are obviously going to say, like, these can't be the only people that represent us. There's no women here. Like, and it makes them think that this is not just a one-time thing, but this is an ongoing problem in our community, that we have a feeling that the people who are behind closed doors making decisions, the people who are on stages representing us, the people who are always the ones speaking for the American Muslim community are almost all men. And they've been raising this problem for a while now. So other people could look at it and also have questions about, like, the ethnic makeup of it, or questions about, like, all these people could afford to fly to this place, and did they make any allowance for poor people in our community? There's a lot of questions that could be raised once you say, like, this is something that represents the whole community rather than just being a gathering of some people doing good. But I think in whatever case, I like what you said, and I think the sincerity of us all is to look at people whenever someone else is doing something. Try to look at it from their perspective first, see what their intention was. If they're doing good, to be appreciative of that. If there's something that maybe they could benefit from, to give them nasiha in the correct way that we give nasiha. And these are beautiful basic things, but that's what our community really needs, is to understand these basic things. There will be public issues where people are going to be frustrated and raise complaints, and it's up to them. And I think I haven't really seen any reaction from the scholars to the complaints, other than one person, I think, who got in trouble because he reacted. But the vast majority of them stayed silent. And because I know many of them, I would assume that I would hope that their reaction would be, Jazakallah khair for your advice. Obviously, we have to think about this in the future. Maybe it did occur to us, and for a specific reason, we didn't have any sisters here. Maybe it never even occurred to us, and maybe, that's a problem. Now in the future, we'll think of that.
Beautifully said, yeah.
So because they're doing it sincerely for Allah, again, first check yourself before you start any debate or discussion. Yeah. Check yourself, like, is this criticism, or is my being defensive about the criticism? Is it sincerely for the sake of Allah, or is it just my nafs? And if it's your nafs, then just calm down. Say Jazakallah khair for the advice, and really reflect and think about how you can get better. I think if we're sincere, that will lead us to success. Like, that's what trusting Allah means. That sincerity will lead us to success. We don't need to worry about anything else.
As we wrap up, Abdul Malik, I was going to ask you for one practical point of advice. I think you nailed it right there. Sheikh Amr, do you have a practical word of advice for our listeners as far as their social media content goes? One thing we can take away from all this,
of what their social media content should be like,
their conduct on social media.
Their conduct. Like I said before, man, just if you have a certain aura in the way of conducting yourself outside of social media, just be the same way. It's probably going to be better for your health.
Hit the nail on the head.
It's going to be better for your health. You won't have to partition two separate lifestyles.
Assuming it's good outside.
Yeah, so
everyone's good.
If you're a troll in person, then be a troll on social media too.
I'm not going to say all that. That's Maheen saying that, but
that's how I interpreted it.
That's a gist of the concept I'm not talking about. It's the reality of it. But yeah, and I think that's going to make things a lot easier for yourself. And you won't have to worry. I personally, and I know I'm going to be talking too much about this, maybe a tangent, but I know personally people that pose specifically differently for their Facebook posts and their Twitter posts, and the way they talk is completely different, and their lifestyle is completely different just for social media. And just as my humble nasiha and advice to you, that's not good for your health. That's not good for your health. Forget about Islam. Forget about any of that. That's not good for your health.
You know what I should do is I'm going to write a book called The Commentary of the Fatwa of Sheikh Amr Saeed. So I would interpret that he said make sure it's all consistent. It's okay, just be a troll in real life, and then it'll be all good. That's my explanation of it.
There's many other productive individuals that you can be writing explanations to than what I said, man.
Right, absolutely. Abdul Malik, first of all, Jazakallah khair for coming out Sunday afternoon. Did we miss a Bears game today, by the way?
I think they're on Monday night.
Monday night, okay, yeah. Cutler is starting again, so hopefully they still tank and we can get a number one pick maybe for the Bears. And then the Cubs are playing tonight, Game 5, trying to stay alive. Everyone in Chicago on the edge of their seat. Could be
it might be a
abandoned ship.
I put this out today that there was a very scary, speaking of Halloween, a very scary message from 538 today that statistically, there's actually a greater chance of Donald Trump winning the election than the Cubs winning the World Series.
Oh my gosh.
So,
I think what the Cubs fans have solace in is that they're playing the Cleveland Indians, and Cleveland has historically been, I don't know the Cavs won this year, but they've historically been prone to choking in epic ways.
You know what? Even if the Cavs win, how fitting is it that Cleveland wins on the 1 year that no one will be happy for them? Because everyone in the world wants the Cubs to win.
Yeah.
And finally, when Cleveland actually wins the championship, no one's going to be happy for
LeBron's
you.
going to switch teams,
Sorry,
man.
Cleveland.
That's how he does.
Yeah. All right, Abdul, jazakallah for coming on again. If for our listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments or, some feedback for our podcast, you can email us at themadmamluks@gmail.com. Check out our website, www.themadmamluks.com. Follow us on Twitter, The Mad Mamluks. Like our Facebook page by the same name. Subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Rate us 5 stars. For Abdul Malik Ryan, for my co-host Sheikh Amr Saeed and Sim, I'm Mahin, signing off. Assalamu alaikum.